Okay, so I'm really happy to be joining my fellow pilot,
Yes.
which is the good Sister Toya, who's has a voluminous knowledge when it comes to literature, to pop culture, sci-fi, and sort of many aspects of sci-fi. But how are you doing, Toya? It's been a while. So how's life treating you?
Yes. Life has been treating me well and hope the same for you. And everyone else is watching as well.
Oh yes, oh yeah. And so we really do appreciate our fans. We know it's been a while since we've been here, and so feel free to post stuff in the comments and give us your thoughts in the comments. So we're here to kind of talk about our impressions of Dune and Dune Part Two, which of course is following the 2021 film that Demi Villeneuve my French is about as good as my Spanish, uh, that he produced in 2021. We know that the pandemic slowed it down. It was supposed to come out in 2020, but part two is right on track. And we hear that there's a part three coming. So as fans know, the film Dune, or the films Dune, the Dune series comes from Frank Herbert's book, really what is considered one of the all-time great sci-fi books, at least in the sense of the galaxy building, the imperial galaxy building mode. Like with of course, George Lucas of film fame, but of course Isaac Asimov with the Foundation. And so, there's a lot of world building in Dune. What Tori and I are going to do is we're just going to give you our impressions. We're going to presume you saw the film, good folks. So we'll say spoiler alert if you haven't, but we'll presume that you've seen the film, and we're just going to give our impressions. But then we're going to also give in to what we do in the Black Spaces show. And so we want to give a shout out to you, to ask you to subscribe to our channel. As things have slowed down a little bit with me with work, I'm going to ramp up my love for discussing sci-fi, particularly when I got brilliant folk like Toya to join me. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and give us your patronage, and we're very grateful if you are. Toya, give your general impressions of what you saw in Dune Part Two, and so we'll start off with what you liked, then we'll talk about what we like least, and then we'll go into what we call our Black Spaces unique critique. So, what did you like most about Dune Part Two?
What I really enjoyed was the fact that it picked up from where the 2021 film left off. I
Mm-hmm.
felt that it gave a good arc to all the major characters. It advanced the story. The
Right.
setting was gorgeous, given consideration that this is a world where primarily the action took place on giant sand dunes.
Mm,
It still felt engaging. You felt the thirst
right.
of everyone in the desert trying to make it through and try to, rally the forces to fight against those invaders that were trying to wipe them off the face of the earth or
Am
face of
I
the planet.
right?
I felt that the acting was dynamic.
I agree.
Kudos all around. I think that everyone really made the plots believable. It was
Mm-hmm.
very engaging. It is not a short movie. We're not talking about 90 minutes by no stretch of the imagination,
Who knew?
but you were fulfilled with being challenged to keep up with what was going on. So overall, I was very happy that the movie was made in a time where, like you said, the pandemic caused some delays to push back, and that's why there was the break in time. But
Mm-hmm.
overall, it was a good movie. I think it did honor to the book as well
Mm-hmm.
as to the original Dune that came out many, many years ago.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is like the third iteration. There was
Mm-hmm.
the 1984 version, the 2000 Sci-Fi Channel version, and
Mm-hmm.
now this one. And I think this one is the best one.
I agree.
I agree with you that I was a kid in grade school. I was in grade school in 2017. And That's not even a good joke. But I read these books in elementary school, or began to read this book in elementary school, along with the Foundation series, which, not elementary. I was in junior high, going into high school.
Mhm.
And it were deep. It was deep, the world building. I was fascinated when reading Frank Herbert's original Dune, because it was the first I had read a little bit of the Foundation with Asimov, but it was the first sci-fi book I picked up that had a glossary in the back of the book.
Right.
Like, that's how deep he's trying to build this world. And Frank Herbert's whole vision, he was trying to really kind of give strong social commentary about the future of humanity, of his critique of sort of the Messiah figure. We'll get into that. But also his critique about ecological disasters and ecological and environmental concerns. That's the whole conception, how he came up with Dune. And so I think the film is just sort of gorgeous. I mean, it's sort of amazing how you can, and I don't think I should be surprised, but it's amazing how you can take the desert, all the colors of the desert, all the tones, and sort of the sepia and ochre, you can see through our backdrop here, but all the sort of beautiful tones, and really kind of make the desert look beautiful.
Right.
Whereas
Make it look lush.
yeah, and lush, right? It was lush without water, right? Without vegetation.
Right.
Whereas the Imperial Palace looked gray and actually small, and kind of blanched. So I think that was absolutely great. I mean, I think the acting is fabulous. The action is fabulous. It took my breath away when it was the soldiers, I think it was the Sardaukar soldiers, I believe, or maybe the Sardaukar that might have been in the Harkonnen soldiers, but they were coming to look for the Fremen. And they were all walking in a line, and then at one point at the beginning of, they just said, okay, we're just gonna float up and look. And they just like climbed and I'm like, that was kind of amazing. And I like, it wasn't that big of an effect, but it just looked seamless and like it was actually happening. So, I kind of just love this. I think the pacing was wonderful. I think the music was great. So I do agree. There's some legendary folk who said that they think this is one of the best sci-fi films in a long time, if not ever created, which is kind of big tribute. So yeah, it's a lot to like about this, and to keep watching it again and again. And I'm going to watch it again and again to pull more meaning out of it. What do you think in terms of the I was watching the first film with some folk who were who weren't deep Doom fans, but they enjoyed the Doom movie. And when they got to the end of the first movie and it said part one, they like, part one? Right. I've been sitting here 3 hours, part one. So what did you think of Villeneuve's decision to break this book into two films, to not try like the David Lynch movie, to try and pack it into one movie, but to break it into parts? What did you think of that move?
I think it was a good decision. I think because it is such a luscious story where you take the character from where we meet him as just the reluctant son of the Duke to him being cast out and him rediscovering for the first time, in a sense, his strength. Right. And all the history that he had within him, and coming to terms with his power, harnessing the voice. So I think that it needed to be two films. We need to have that break to allow, in a sense, off camera for him to develop. So that when we're reintroduced to him in the desert with the Freeman, he's coming to himself a little bit more. He's no longer just looking to prove himself. He has proven himself. He defeated one of their best fighters. Right. He's earned his right to be in the circle with the elders, and he's earned his right to dictate, this is what we should do, and this is what I'm going to do to further prove myself. So that even if there are people that still giving him the side eye, he's at least conquered. He at least has someone they say, well, you remember, he's not here just because he's royalty. He's here because he's in it with us. He's shoulder
Mm-hmm.
to shoulder. He's
Mm-hmm.
walking the same paths that we're walking.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was necessary to have the break, because I think if it had been crammed into one 3 hour, a lot of things that would have made the story, that a lot of things that made the story stronger would have been lost or watered down to the point that they may have just left it out in the first place.
Right, right. I agree. I think it was a good move. I think the 2000 version, was an attempt to do just this, to break it into parts, because it was a miniseries. It was Dune the
Mm-hmm.
miniseries, right? And because it is such, I mean, between Frank Herbert and his son Brian, I forget if there's a dozen books or so, but
Mm-hmm.
and believe you me, by the time you get to the end of Herbert's writing of the books before he passes, it gets surreal. It gets funky,
Mm.
So like Dune Messiah is going to be funky enough, but I won't spoil it for folk who haven't read the books, but it gets real funky. And so, because it's such a lush story that he's trying to tell, a galactic story he's trying to tell,
Mm-hmm.
a story about a whole universe that he's trying to tell, you can't cram all that in one story. And unlike, when and I mentioned this to say, because the David Lynch version, when you went into that 1980, when you went into cinemas in the 1984, I remember well, actually, I would have been in college, but I remember getting no, I was in high school. I'll give myself credit. I was in high school, but I remember getting a glossary of terms, a sheet handed to you when you walked in. I'm like, okay, let me figure
Wow.
out what's a basar and a knob baron, and so they were trying to convey that heft, that gravitas that the book has, but you can't do that, and do it in such a way that you got people got to have a cheat sheet while they're looking up at the
Right.
screen. So I thought that was a
Exactly.
strange move. Whereas I think you don't have to know all the characters' names in Villeneuve's version. You don't have to know all of the terms and all of the world building to get it, because I think the way in which he and his co-author or co-writer crafted this story, it is, self-explanatory in places. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the choice of the Harkonnens? Fans, I call them Harkonnens, because when I was reading the book, to me that sounds more malevolent than Harkonnen. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, but what did you think of the Harkonnens and the choice of black and white, stark black and white?
I think that was a spot on
Mm-hmm.
choice, very stylistic. I think that it sort of telegraphs immediately, without them saying anything, what kind of people we're dealing with. I
Right.
think that we have such a color association that we know when you see the nephew
Oh yeah.
just stark whiteness,
That's right.
just
That's right.
evil
Foyt
incarnate,
Rafa.
just
Mm-hmm.
blanched,
Right.
so yeah, that's
Right.
these bad news all the way around.
Yeah.
I think that was a very deliberate style choice that made perfect sense. I think it elevated the action. I think it basically gave the audience the sense that we're dealing with something that is unusually evil.
Right.
So I kudos to that.
Right, right. Yeah, when you contrast it with the in the previous film in Dune, one, I guess you would say,
Mm-hmm.
with the Atreides, the House of Atreides, they are their colors are green, right? Green as in life and verdant, whereas the
Mm-hmm.
Harkonnens, and their planet GD Prime are black and white. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was masterful. Even the fireworks,
Right.
when
Right.
Rotha kills his opponent, the last Atreides House
Mm-hmm.
member, even the fireworks were black and white. It's like they
Mm-hmm.
were like ink spots in the sky. And I thought, like, that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
masterful. They kept
Right.
consistency. So to me, those types of color choices and stylistic choices were pretty masterful. What
Mm-hmm.
did you think of the dialogue? You're a writer, and I
Mm-hmm.
know if the writing ain't good, it ain't hitting on nothing for yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
what did you think of the dialogue? Was there anything that stuck out, worked or didn't work? Because I'm sure you would have picked that out if it didn't work.
It was very poetic. I
Okay,
like the fact, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was so engaged. Is not
okay,
only the way that the lines were delivered, but it was the lines that were being delivered. I think that it was
that's right.
very melodic. I
Uh-huh.
think that it added weight to what was going on in terms of the action.
Okay,
Because I think that in science fiction, too often you have a whole bunch of laser beams and swords and just all this stuff that's going on that's in a sense can become distracting.
right,
I think we want to be able to engage and connect with those quiet moments when the
right.
characters are talking to each other because that's what
Hmm.
really pushes the story forward. So
Yep,
I think the
agreed.
writing was wonderful.
Right, right. And in this version, Villeneuve decided to bring in the voice of Prince Irulan
Mm,
because throughout the book, and I bet Frank Herbert was inspired by Asimov. I
mm,
read some of the greats, I guess you would say.
right,
Um,
right.
Asimov would have this sort of text because he had the Encyclopedia Britannica, and we
Mm-hmm,
won't go. We're not talking about Foundation, but he would have sort of these texts that were historical text as the epigraphs to chapters,
mm,
and so that's the same thing with the Princess Irulan, that
mm-hmm,
she was the narrator of Moab Deeb's story of
mm-hmm,
the Lisan al Gaib, he would become the emperor. She was the narrator of his story because she became his wife, right? In the story
mm-hmm,
that they married out of a political marriage. And so she faithfully told the story, but she was also Bene Gesserit. And they always, as a sisterhood, have ulterior designs.
mm-hmm,
They're all about manipulating soft power,
mm-hmm,
manipulation of culture, manipulation of religion. So since she was really committed to the emperor and the imperial house, really, she was supposed to be about the sisterhood. It was about documenting the story, and documenting the fact that Paul Moab Dib, the many faces of this guy. The was it the Chris Satch Haderach, all this so the heavy stuff. She was supposed to be that voice, and so I think it was kind of poetic for it to be told in her voice to a degree, or really
mm-hmm.
told from the perspective of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. Yeah. Okay. What did you like the least? Anything, we'll get into our unique critique in just a second, but what did you like the least stylistically, or was there anything that you said, they could have done differently? Hmm.
Honestly, I think that the weakest part of the movie still wasn't enough to bring it down. I
Okay.
think that with all things, with I think this the story itself was leading to an ending that I personally felt was a cop out, but then
Okay.
again, it's not a cop out because it serves the purpose
Okay.
of basically confirming why you can't have everybody as your leader and you
Right.
can't put
Not as your
everyone on
Messiah.
the throne.
That's right.
Right, you can't have everybody carried around as the chosen one. Everyone is not the chosen one, no
Right.
matter
Right.
what they can do with their blade,
Right.
or passive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I thought that on that note, because we were talking about what with Chinese, that she was disappointed. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's not quite putting it correctly to say she was disappointed. She was mad. she
Right,
was she was upset,
rightfully so.
frustrated, and
Yeah.
angry that Paul would desert her and marry, the Princess Irulan in order to
Mm-hmm.
become the emperor. The very thing he said he didn't want to become. But then, of
Right.
course, when he went through his transformation with the water of life, all of a sudden he's the
Mm-hmm.
Messiah. So, so but toward that end, I thought it surprised me that Villeneuve made Christopher Walken and thus the Emperor Shaddam such a
Mm-hmm.
weak and cowering figure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now maybe we're saying, well, how could he possibly have been overthrown easily enough simply by a taunt from Paul calling him to the planet, saying, "I dog dare you to come here to the planet and find me,"
Right.
which was kind of stupid. Okay, let me come over to the planet. Supposed to just send my army, my Sardaukar army. But anyway,
Right.
but he and the Baron had a dirty secret to hide with him overthrowing the House Atreides. Christopher Walken's character was just a little too frail and weak. And I didn't quite believe that's the Emperor Shaddam I've read about for two decades. I don't know.
Right.
Christopher Walken is a fabulous actor, but I kept saying that's Christopher Walken. It's just like,
right.
I don't even think that his imperial personage, and maybe you don't have to necessarily have him wear a crown, but he wasn't regal looking. He didn't
have the bearing.
He didn't have the bearing. It's like it looked like an old man in his pajamas.
Right, exactly. Like he's just been worn out.
Tired. It's time to go home. And so maybe that set it up nicely to say, okay, well, clearly he could be easily overthrown. Maybe it did speak to the fact that he wanted, and it was interesting because he described the Duke Leto as he loved him like a son, and yet he killed him and demolished all notion of his existence by unleashing the Baron and the Sardaukar army on him. So that's another tiny weakness. It's not a big one, but I still never quite got the sense of why the Emperor had to kill the Duke.
Right.
And I'll say that to say, I bought it that at the end he said to Paul, your father led with his heart, not with his, his head or so. I forgot what exactly the line is. Fans, you can put it in the chat. So I got that, but it still didn't quite seem like, I think it would have helped to put the Emperor in the first film just a little. True. To build up as to why, even if it was a scene where the Baron is speaking to the Emperor, and that you don't see the Emperor, you just simply hear his voice. Right. And the Baron, and he conveys to the Baron, we must stop him before he becomes Emperor, or whatever the reason. But I just didn't quite buy it that this is why you destroyed the Duke, because he was too good, he was too popular with the Landsraad. Right. And you staked he was producing the spice. You staked your whole future and destroyed your imperial control over that anyway. Because anyway. So that's what fans, you can tell me if you agree, but those are two things I thought were kind of subtle weaknesses. It doesn't destroy what I thought was otherwise a brilliant film, but subtle weaknesses. Yeah. Okay. Toya, you know us. We got to give our unique critique.
Yes.
Unique critique. So fans, we want to just let you know, we love the film. Let me be clear. We love the film, but there is nothing perfect. And we bring unique critiques because sci-fi is a story that we interpret, right? It is not just entertainment. It means something, and it can be a parable, it can be an allegory, right? So what's been often said about Dune is whether or not Frank Herbert intended to, did Denis Villeneuve intend to write a white savior story? That's the question we'll put on the table. You can feel free to disagree with us, fans, but that's the question we can put on the table. So, Toya, do you want to go first as to and the white savior trope is this idea, like Lawrence of Arabia, which of course Frank Herbert was subtly pulling from, this idea of, well, ultimately the downtrodden people are saved by this white guy on a horse, and they wouldn't have gotten out of their situation. The Fremen wouldn't have been liberated if the great Kisas Haderach, Lisan Agi, I know all the terms. if he and his mother hadn't come and fulfilled the prophecy, which the Bene Gesserit falsely put in place. But if he had, fulfilled the prophecy, then the little brown people of the Fremen of Arrakis would not have been liberated. What do you think? What's your critique? White savior myth upheld or not?
I think it was not, but it was not because of the twist that it wasn't necessarily that he elevated himself. He didn't like put himself in that position solely. It was like he was pushed into that position.
Mm-hmm.
I think just the fact that he was being told, even when he was denying it initially, that I'm not the Messiah, I'm not the Savior.
Mm-hmm.
But they were trying to insist that, oh, no, yes, you are. Yes, you
Yes, you
are.
are. Yes, you are.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that it sort of puts a twist on that, in that too often times we're too willing to elevate someone that doesn't deserve that position,
Right.
even to our detriment.
Right.
And I think that this was a perfect example that, yes, he came to them with very honorable intentions,
Right.
that going through the process, he was willing to do what he needed to do. He would need, to master the art of getting the sandworm to come to him, that he could ride the sandworm. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
he had to get
Mm-hmm.
the biggest sandworm.
That's right.
He was very focused and genuine about soliciting their thoughts instead of dictating.
Right.
And then, of course, as it went on, that sort of got twisted, and to the point where he's telling them that, yes, we're going to fight, and like, they're not really free. They're free to lay their lives down and be sacrificed.
Right.
So I do think it sort of put a twist on that typical myth that we've seen, but there's enough of it that it still sort of holds true, that too often the white man is the right person to make the decisions, whereas you have generations of persons of color who've been doing just fine on their own. Like when they were fighting the soldiers, and they came up with the idea to come up from the sand
Oh, yeah.
and
They already had
win.
those
I mean,
tactics.
that wasn't his idea. That was them mastering the art
That's
of
right.
fighting using what resources that they had.
Right.
So I do think that it sort of took the trope in a different direction.
Right.
Which I think is very clever.
Right. Right. I agree that Villeneuve was definitely trying to embrace the spirit of what Frank Herbert was doing in the book. Herbert was providing a very I don't know what I could say, a trenchant and maybe even cynical view about do not trust the Messiah, the messiahs in your midst. That religion can be manipulated when it is religion can be used to manipulate. It can be a powerful manipulator, and that people and empires and little people are crushed because of these grand designs. And I do think that you saw in Paul, in this version of Paul, unlike Frank Herbert, the Atreides in Frank Herbert's book are a bit more manipulative. They are a little bit more patronizing toward the Fremen. Whereas in this version, they're a little bit not paternal. They're more benevolent and empathetic. It's like, we want to make this genuine alliance. Paul kept saying, you kept seeing Timothy Chalamet sort of go back and forth about, and I think he did an excellent job. You just saw him just tortured. I don't want to become this Messiah. Mother, this is your prophecy of your Bene Gesserit. It has nothing to do with me. If I can just help and fight these people to fight, in order for us to take revenge on the Baron and the Emperor, we will. And then he went through that change of life. He took the water of life. Became the messianic figure, and actually that scene in the siege in the cavern, that was beautiful. I mean, it's just just season, and it seemed like it was 1 million people in that cavern, right? As he walked through as the quote unquote Messiah figure, he looked messianic, right? People parted as he stepped aside. So yeah, I do think that he was trying to live up to the spirit of being a strong critique of the white Messiah. However, there's some folk missing from the part 2 that would have helped further that critique. Like, for instance, Leah Kynes, we know Leah Kynes dies, but Leah Kynes is, a black woman in the first film, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that portrayal, we know, why am I forgetting the name of the mentat? But the mentat who is the second in, or is the lieutenant to the Duke,
Mm-hmm.
he's not in the film. Of course, Jamis was killed by Paul, another black person
Mm-hmm.
who is not in the film and who is prominent. Even the voice of the Herald of the Change, who was the only really imperial presence in the first. You see this huge ship descend and this chocolatey brown, man of African descent step out and convey the imperial wishes. Of course, he's probably not supposed to be in the film, but he's not in the film. So to me, there's an absence of a black presence, which makes the degree of sort of, I'm gonna go there, fans, a little bit of whiteness kind of stark. Now, right. I'm not saying entirely, because if you look, and some fans were kind of, we were going back and forth, sort of joking with each other. There are Fremen of color, black Fremen. There are, the individuals who, the woman who was the attendant and helped Lady Jessica, So there are black Fremen or Fremen of color, and you can see that the Fremen kind of would, in our American sense, would be of color. So I'm not saying that there was like an absence of, but the prominent figures, the figures who you say, like, look at the folk in this picture, other than Zendaya, you're kind of missing, and Bardane, you're kind of missing, right? And you're certainly missing blackness. So that's what I think makes the critique not quite as powerful as it could have been, maybe. Because in the end, Paul does become the white savior, right? He becomes the imperial, and Atreides, are descendant from a I forget exactly which house, but they're directly descendant of Greek descent from Earth. So they have thousands of history that descends from Greek ancestry of Earth. They literally are of European ancestry. Right. So it does reinforce the danger of the white savior critique, but it could have been a bit more powerful if we had a few more black voices, possibly prominent. That might have helped. I'll say that. But all the same, I think it's intriguing. Feel free, fans, to post if you think, no, it really is a white savior myth, or no, it is not at all. But Toya and I say we see some elements. We see some elements. Okay, any other comments or any thoughts? Toya, I don't know if you want to give it a rating. You don't want to have to give it a rating, but how do you think it does with regards to, the one other thing I'll just mention real quickly, the Baron. So, the whole question about the Baron being, so in Frank Herbert's book, the Baron, I don't know if I want to say gay, but he had homoerotic desires. Homoerotic desires so virulent that he would not only have sex with slave boys and men, but kill them as a result. And in fact, someone tried to poison the Baron in the book by putting I think it was a dart in the shoulder or leg of one of the slave boys, because they were trying to poison him because he knew the Baron was going to put his hands on him. That's completely missing, of course, from Villeneuve. The question I've heard fans sort of banter about was, Frank Herbert had a contentious relationship with his gay son, and did he have homophobic views that seeped into the book and the Baron's character that are not here in the movie? But anyway, we give unique critiques, so I just wanted to put that out, because I've have heard that sort of whole discussion about where is that element. Although, right. They're bad enough, they're evil enough.
Right. Don't need to tie homosexuality to their wickedness. They're wicked on their own. You don't need to tie in their sexual desires to the wickedness.
That's right. Okay. Any last thoughts, Toya? Any last thoughts?
I enjoyed it. I would say if I had to give it a grade, I would give it a good B+.
Okay.
Because it was entertaining. I think it advanced the story. Particularly when you think about it, this is a third incarnation. I think it elevated the source material, but
Uh-huh.
it didn't take it in a completely different direction that someone who, like yourself, has read the book, have
Right.
seen the movie, seen the miniseries, can still find common elements, but still appreciate what was done different. I
Okay.
mean, there was missteps. There's always going to be a misstep, you know. But
Hmm.
I think overall, I think even with when we think about the missteps, I think the missteps were good source for conversation, good reason for discourse, and
Okay.
good ways to evaluate the product. So I would say a B plus.
Okay. Okay. Even with my trenchant critique, I'd say B plus, edging on A minus,
Mm-hmm.
because I can't find sort of critiques that I say this was fatal, or not fatal,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but this turned it off for me. That I looked at my watch and I'm like, 2 hours went by, you know, and sometimes I'll say, Toya, when I'm in like a really good film, I literally said in my head, I literally will say to myself, "Oh, this is good. This is good." So I got that this is good feeling, and I could see how others see this as quite an accomplishment on Villeneuve's part.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we've held you long enough, good folks. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for all the comments you posted and all the ways in which you support us. If you want more of our unique critiques, because we think they're pretty good, but you, the fans, tell us. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button to subscribe to keep Black Spaces thriving. And then Toya, we got the Star Trek Discovery coming up. We
Yes,
got Planet of the
tomorrow.
Apes coming up. Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
Discovery, that's the bomb. We have fun with Discovery.
Yes, yes.
And there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there. Three Bodies Problem. There's just a
Yeah.
lot of great sci-fi this year. A lot of great
Mm-hmm.
sci-fi, along with the, sort of the Star Wars various iterations,
Mm-hmm.
Bad Batch, and the Acolyte coming up. So stay tuned. We're gonna have something to say about all of them.
Yes.
I certainly thank you, good folks, for joining us. Thank you, Toya. You and I will do this again,
Yes,
absolutely sooner than has been previously.
definitely.
And fans, join us here on this channel. Um, we always say at Black Spaces, we'll catch you on the backhand side in the black